invite, we're going to do our speaker panel now. Teresa Thomas, Laura Dunham, Ron Wicks, and also Barb Spurrier. Would you please come up to the stage? And I'm going to come out where you all are, and you're going to get an opportunity to ask these lovely guests some questions. So, come on up. Yeah?
Questions for Laura Dunham. If you talked about a business plan, what could you incorporate, or what would you recommend incorporating in a business plan that would actually catch hold of people and get them to listen to your plan and then to buy into it?
You know, interestingly enough, our students, business people need to have a business plan for sure when they're going for financing and funding. But we're increasingly encouraging people who are entrepreneurial and innovative, instead of putting together the full business plan, to actually put together what we call a business model canvas, which is simply a template that says, here's the primary assumptions that we're making about our business, and here's how we're going to test them really quickly and cheaply. So we're really putting much less emphasis, believe it or not, on the business plan until the company's really ready to scale, or the idea is really ready to be scaled. So early on, what we're really emphasizing, if you are an innovator, you've got an idea that's new and fresh, you need different kinds of tools, and the tool that's not as helpful as a business plan. Clearly, when you're at the stage when you're writing a business plan because you're going to get funding, you've got you've done proof of concept, your idea has been accepted by customers, you have enough information. The other thing I do tell myself, in the first page, you can't share with me a customer problem and a story about how you're going to sell it, or how you're going to solve that problem, then you've lost me. Most people won't go past that first page. So it's really about who's your customer, how well do you know, what is the problem, how are you solving that problem, that pain point for them in new and better ways. So being able to tell great stories of entrepreneurs is really important too. That story that's rooted in real customer needs.
Great. Who else has a question?
I was strong in saying that the number one barrier to innovation is bureaucracy. I would be interested in each of you saying, is it bureaucracy, or have you got a second to contend with bureaucracy as the biggest problem?
Someone has to start.
I'm happy to take a stab at that. So when I think about the journey we've been on with innovation at Mayo Clinic, I would say that we've really needed to think about how to position innovation in the organization, and we've been really fortunate because our innovation function reports to our highest level of leadership. So we've had the very, very strong support of our most senior leaders, our CEO, on down. And we don't really have any layers between the Center for Innovation and our most senior leaders. And we really have been learning about the need to move to prototyping, experimentation prototyping, as quickly as we can without having a lot of, I don't want to say interference from committees, but we have the opportunity to be trying a lot of things without getting a lot of permissions. And this idea that we can come forward as we're understanding needs of customers we're trying to serve and share that and have this more distributed model, as I mentioned, where we have skill sets sort of planted across the organization. And that distributed model has been incredibly helpful, that we haven't walled off our Center for Innovation. Some are off in an unmarked warehouse. Ours is definitely right in the nerve center of the organization where everything is transparent and exposed. And that's really helped us, I think, with the alignment of leadership, how we're trying to position the function around moving to prototyping without a lot of permissions as we move into that. And then really having our environments be part of the organization and a lot of open relationships.
And I think one of the things that we've learned about, and I absolutely agree with everything that Barbara said here in terms of having to have direct access to senior management, having a distributed model. But one of the things we found about busting bureaucracy is truly disruptive innovations have to be housed separately. You have to be willing to create, even beyond skunk works, this notion of small autonomous teams set up in their own little business, with their own set of metrics, able to pursue and experiment, act fast with those permissions. So this notion of recognizing that bureaucracy can be a real barrier and creating structures within the organization where people are free to that, to pursue truly innovative ideas. Okay, following on that question, I don't have a whole lot to say because I live in this bubble where I mostly see micro businesses all the time who aren't restrained by as much bureaucracy, so they can be highly innovative and adaptable. But I will say that over the years I've learned that having some sense of structure and systems in place for decision making has been really helpful because as somebody who is more of a creative thinker, I need those structures to react against and to push against. Otherwise, I'm floating off into space. And so having some of those systems and structures in place I found to be really helpful and to actually push even more innovation because I'm reacting against something instead of operating completely open.
I have a question for Ron. This basically, not really a question, basically it's go ahead.
Well, I would love to answer you, Kevin. Let me just address your comment. So I'm going to come at it from a related but slightly different direction. On behalf of the micro-business demographic, it's ignorance. Bureaucracy, absolutely, and I'm sure we could all have some adjectives or even verbs. It's ignorance. I had the opportunity to work with, to be a member of the 15-member Obama small business team in 2008. I've done a lot of work nationally and internationally on behalf of it with the micro-business demographic, that 95.8. The biggest thing is I have talked with the vice president. I've talked with people around the country and abroad. They don't know what a micro-business is. They don't know where the jobs are created. Since 2002 in the United States, almost all U.S. jobs are created by Kevin hiring Kevin, not by Ron hiring Kevin. They don't understand that 80% of the innovation comes from the microbusiness. So if they don't even understand the microbusiness demographic, how it's vastly different than small business, it's a Grand Canyon-like difference. They're ignorant, they don't know what they don't know about the entire demographic, so how can they support the innovation that the 80% that comes from it, if that makes sense to you?
So you and I in our conversation, you talked about networking as currency. I know our time is short here, but could you just elaborate a little bit on just the power of that currency, or how you utilize it as currency?
Thank you. Networking is currency because I mentioned earlier in my presentation that networking is a platform, it's an operating system, it's a foundation on which micro-businesses and other businesses operate. And one of the most important things, I think the ladies at the back table, Lori and Lisa and you guys, I mean, this is how you operate. It's by referral. How micro-businesses and other firms and organizations operate is they give advice, they give guidance, they say, gee, who you should really hire is, where you should buy that, the decision you should make is because I've been there, done that. It's about referrals and advice, which translates to trust. Trust is the currency of networking. I trust you, I'm going to lean forward, I'm going to take that action, and remember, we don't do it alone. We can't do it alone. I don't trust you, dead in the water. So the trust is the currency.
So anybody who wants to jump in on this topic about culture and innovation. Corporate culture as well as the more generalized culture of where you're from. The corporate culture in a large company is harder to have it trickle down than a smaller company, so if somebody could address that. And then secondly, I worked in manufacturing R&D with an Israeli company and an American company. The engineers from both countries had a different way of discussing and arguing, really. The Israelis were much more likely to give constructive criticism, not be PC, and he was often much more creative, actually. So he would speak to culture.
So one of the things that we've been learning on our journey, at first we started, and in fact our CEO asked in our Center for Innovation to in addition to working and transforming health and healthcare and really building out new models as we understand, again, needs of customers and patients, to also help Mayo build a culture and competency of innovation. And you know, we really thought a lot about that as we started again on this journey. And one of the things is we thought we really want to embrace the culture that Mayo already has. There's so many wonderful things about the culture. And so what we did instead, and I know this doesn't work for every organization, is we called it out as a competency of innovation. Because it really is a discipline that's emerging around the world. And rather than challenge the culture necessarily, we thought as we start building out a competency, and as we start giving people experience and learning about innovation in an applied way, and joining projects and joining teams, it can start to influence the culture of the organization. But to challenge that right in the beginning versus calling it out as really its own discipline and learning from that was at least a better approach for us.
And I think, you know, we've absolutely learned through research, culture is a huge either obstacle or facilitator of innovation. You know, the norms we have around collaboration, around trust. You know, I can only be creative to the degree that I trust the people in the room aren't going to laugh at what I'm saying and are going to go with me on this stuff, right? So trust, collaboration, being able to fail early and cheaply are some of the really core elements of culture that have to happen. And you know, large-scale cultural change is hard, but we've also found that in large organizations, people that we term catalysts can be people who within their own organizations start giving the people they're working with some of these permissions, start sort of piloting small-scale innovation projects where they're teaching them the tools, but also very, very conscious of the cultural norms that they are attempting to, that they need to change in order for that stuff to happen. So it can happen. It's a slow process, but it doesn't mean even within a large sclerotic organization, it can't happen. You know, there are pockets, and they start feeding other pockets within large organizations as well. But culture is really key, for sure.
I'd like to briefly piggyback on what you mentioned and talk about culture and culture, because I think that's one of the elephants in the room in terms of innovation and even success and great achievement, particularly from an entrepreneurial standpoint, is the culture, the attitude, the philosophy, the perspective of a group. There's also the cultural, the ethnic kinds of things. When I was in Eastern Europe, they completely reject entrepreneurism because of the Russian occupation and some other, it's very, very involved, but there are national cultural issues between countries that can impede those kinds of things. I'll give you a very cheap plug, Kevin, with your permission. World's Fair. So we began to talk about that. Mayo was one of our partners. I'm a part of the executive team of the Expo 2023 project bringing the World's Fair to Minnesota in 2023. Currently, there are 168 member countries in the Bureau of International Expositions, and I'd love to explain that to you over lunch or later in the day, but that the two main words of a World's Fair are culture and innovation. Sharing those, collaborating around those, even the logistics of having the event. It's the largest event on the planet. And so bringing solutions, remedies, and other kinds of cultural things to an area, just the process of doing it, plus what's there. And we had a state fair booth at the World's Fair booth at the state fair where Pete's company had a device. It was incredibly popular, and we were saying, this is brand new technology. Do you imagine what they're going to be doing in 9 years when we have the World's Fair? And people were, I mean, they're making hearts and skin and all kinds of things that are complete game changers. So I'd like us to think about the culture and the culture.
And I just want to say one other thing about culture, because obviously culture is it's not a standalone kind of concept. You have to have a structure, you have to have policies in place. that support the culture. But I think one of the interesting things that I've learned from IDEO, I think I heard Tim Brown speak about this, was one place you start is by bringing in the right people, thinking really hard about the kinds of people that will flourish in a collaborative, creative environment. And they have a fantastic concept called T-shaped people. They look for T-shaped people. And the T is the vertical axis, the T is what we typically look for when we hire people. It is your expertise, it's your domain of experience. They want people who are great engineers, they want people who are great anthropologists, etc. But the part that they add to it that the rest of us always forget when we hire is they're also looking for people, and this is the horizontal axis, that are broadly curious. People who are, have traveled, who are well-read, who are culturally, curious, and they've learned how to identify those kinds of aspects of a human being, even on paper, through various markers on your resume, but also through very careful interviewing. So it's not enough that you're the best engineer. They also want you to be T-shaped. Somebody who's going to be a great collaborator, somebody who's really curious, engaged, broad person. So I think that's an interesting piece that each of us as managers can think about if we're trying to change culture. Who are we bringing in to work with us on our teams?
All right, thank you. We have one last question back here.
And it is along the theme of culture. Barbara, you talked about transforming the process of innovation. Could the panel comment on, is that possible without it being top-down driven? To what extent does it really necessitate being a top-down driven transformation?
We're a very large organization to change without that top-down. There's very few examples that I can come across where a company has transformed radically where it hasn't been driven, by senior management. You can have pockets of excellence. I always encourage my catalysts. You can do this. You can build teams. You can start, starting as kind of a beacon, and sometimes those things cascade through. But truly large-scale change in a fairly short period of time requires senior management support and then proper training, and work on the culture.
And I guess I just would add, and I think it just comes from the stories and our experiences and such. So our Center for Innovation actually started in our Department of Medicine. So it began as a very small program. And I had the good fortune of partnering with the chair of medicine for the last 5 years of his chairmanship. He was in that role for 11 years. And what we tried to do is start really small programs that didn't exist within our divisional and business unit lines. And one was we were starting to pay attention to things we were learning around the country and the world and hearing about innovation. So in our strategic plan, we just put it out there to stimulate innovation and didn't even understand it. So we started building something, and our board became very, very interested and said, tell us what you're learning and come back with a set of recommendations. So I think about that we had someone at a senior leader, our CEO, who was connected into the work we were doing in medicine in that small program, and really giving us permission and asking us to learn more, which we did. And what we needed to do was go out to IBM and 3M and IDEO and Procter & Gamble and come back with some insights about how we might think about positioning innovation in the organization. And it was really through that conversation that we kept building on with our board that little program in a small department morphed into our Center for Innovation. And then the chair of medicine and myself were asked to go ahead and build that and lead that. So as we launched the center, it was very important it was connected in at the highest level of the organization. But when I think back to the very early days and what we were starting to build, I think sometimes it's just a couple of people that are really passionate about something that they're seeing, and you're looking around the corner, and then you have an openness in your organization for that kind of curiosity. So I guess we have different stories for sure.
I hate to do this, but we have to end things to keep things on track. Our catering staff wants to also get lunch out for everyone. So thank you so much. Let's give a round of applause to our great